Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber. You're watching Better for America, sponsored by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. Bobby Charles is AMAC's national spokesman, and he's with me once again today. Bobby, thank you so much for being here. Great to have you.
Rebecca, I just love these shows. Glad to be on.
I love it too, and our members sure do as well. Bobby, every time we get together, the world seems to be unraveling some more, and you always seem to offer hope and great perspective. Today, I want to focus on three issues. They're all tied to your personal perspective on world events, both now and in the past. Now, one is very close to home, another issue, global, and then I want to speak about what's happening in Washington, D.C. But first, starting very close to home, Bobby, I know that this was so close for you living in Maine, and I want to speak about what just happened there. You grew up very close to where the mass shooting occurred, killing 18, wounding 13, and causing really the whole county, the community, to be in lockdown for 2 days. They hunted for this armed Army reservist who was reported to be hearing voices and who committed these absolute terrible, horrible crimes. Now, I know you and many around you took this event as a very sad sign that evil really can show up anywhere, and that the entire state now is in mourning, and the nation mourns for those affected. Can you help us understand, first, perhaps what you did personally to address the situation, and then whether this event changed or, weakened, strengthened our nation's belief in the Second Amendment?
Well, it's an interesting perspective that you ask from, Rebecca, because let me just explain first this general area where I am here. It's very rural. Between me and where that shooting occurred is really mostly just trees. Probably 20 minutes away. I have a number of siblings. One of them teaches right there. So it was very close to home in that physical sense. But this is a place where people trust each other. And I grew up trusting, and we're taught by, I was raised, as people know from my book, I was raised by really World War II vets and people who cared deeply about each other. People tended to leave their doors open. There's a sense that Maine, in some ways, which is a state of only a little over 1 million people, is nothing but a great big family. And so people help each other all the time. They change each other's tires in the winter. If someone's at the side of the road, they jump out on the open sea for a distress call. They are very people, other regarding people. So when this occurred, it would be a shock anywhere, whether it was downtown DC or somewhere else. But it was a mega shock here because people only expect really the best of each other, and they try to give the best of each other to each other. So that was the dramatic side of it. But the big part that you just described is absolutely true. For 2 days after this thing broke, not far from here, this guy was on the loose. And so you might think, oh, well, after all this, he had an AR-15, which is just a semi-automatic, and he had been an Army reservist. We clearly know some bad things were afoot. People who knew that he was hearing voices and threatening to shoot places up, these specific places, for some reason didn't get the message to the right people, and the people who got the message didn't act in a way that we're able to prevent him from doing what he did. But the larger lesson, quite honestly, is that from where I sit right here, reaching out probably 10 miles in any direction, you will have maybe 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, maybe a little more than that people. Every one of them owns a firearm. Every one of them, as soon as this news broke, they went to the safe or the wall or their drawer, and they checked, made sure their clip was loaded, racked the 9mm, racked the 380, maybe took down a shotgun, put a couple shells in it, and they were just ready. And so for 2 nights, I just stayed here with my 9mm at my side, and I was ready. And that's the Second Amendment in action. The old adage that when danger is seconds away, the police are minutes away. Look, the police are an hour or half an hour or 45 minutes away from me at best, and they would have been otherwise preoccupied. So everybody protects themselves. The Second Amendment is a beautiful thing. We have in this state probably between 1 and 3 million guns. I bet it even more than that. And you don't see incidents happening ever. And part of that is the reason is that there are people like me who own their firearms. And when this incident was done, I unloaded it and put it away and under lock and key. But the reality is that we know how to manage firearms. We started at the age of 11 or 12 in the Boy Scouts, or we were shooting clays, or we were out shooting birds, or some of my friends had already taken a deer at the age of 11 or 12. So, people know firearms. They have snow shovels, and they have lakes, and they have guns. They have rakes, and they have guns. They have an ability to change a snow tire and to protect themselves against a madman. And I guess the lesson for me, Rebecca, is that firearms are a very real thing. You should learn how to use them. You should use them wisely. You should carry them appropriately. But at the end of the day, when push comes to shove and it's all up to you to protect your family, firearms are a pretty good way to do that.
Yeah, I think that it was certainly a relief for so many people in that area to know that they did know how to use a firearm. And this is, nobody ever expects this kind of thing to happen. But
No,
what do you do when you have no way to protect yourself against that kind of danger? And this is why AMAC certainly is in great support of our good Second Amendment. So important. I'm just so grateful that this is over behind us. There's going to
so
be
am I.
months and years of healing, and this country needs to do something to address the mental illness. If you see
Yes.
something strange, speak up, report it, stay in the know, and recognize that evil lurks everywhere. None of us are entirely safe, so it's important that we look out for one another as you did in your own community. Bobby, thank
You
you.
know, you know, Rebecca,
Go ahead.
Rebecca, you raise an important point that I should have raised, and that is that this is really all about mental health. The
Yes.
country and Maine, the country, the world is awash in mental health problems, whether it happened after COVID or it's always been there or it just happens to be accelerated now. And this idea that we should look after our neighbors is exactly right. If there's a certain feeling that, well, if I say something, maybe there'll be blowback or whatever. But if you act out
Mhm.
of compassion and you act out of protectiveness, I think, honestly, if more of us did that, and there are mental health issues everywhere, but there are also resources out there. And a good governor would be punching more resources at mental health, not trying to take people's guns away. So that's just my footnote.
Thank you, Bobby. Bobby, I want to shift to a second topic that I want to address. You know quite a bit about counterterrorism and national security. Now, we're watching another war afoot in the Middle East, and this one was started by the terrorist organization Hamas on October 7th. They attacked Israel, killing 1,400 Israelis, 32 Americans. And now we also see war's sadness really affecting so many innocent people in the region, including way too many children in Gaza. And the entire region seems really traumatized. It makes one wonder, since Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Islamic Jihad group are all funded by Iran, are we really at war with Iran? And if so, why did Iran decide that this was the time to strike Israel?
Yeah, so these are very poignant questions. The answer to your question is yes. We are in the midst of a major proxy war with Iran. That's what this is really all about. If I could borrow from the idea of nesting dolls and start small, it looks like to many people this was an attack by a terrorist organization, Hamas, eventually joined by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, by Fatah that has put missiles in, and in the north by Hezbollah, which is really the largest operational arm of Iran's IRGC and their terrorist activities. But they think of it as somehow small, that small circle. It's not a small circle. It's a much wider circle. You have Iran pushing this thing with intent. And to your question about why, Iran has always acted aggressively when there was weakness in the West. They are not just opposed to Israel, they are opposed to all of our Western values. They are opposed to everything that we think about as a fundamental right in our Bill of Rights. They suppress, kill, torment, torture, persecute their own people. 85% of their people would love to be American. They certainly love America. They love the idea of us. We are a beacon to them, and we're a beacon to a lot of people around the world. But this, the Islamic, radical Islamic jihadists hate the United States. They hate Western values, and obviously they hate Israel. So the first doll, if you will, the first centerpiece was this direct attack by one terrorist organization, then joined by others, funded by Iran. And frankly, I'm very concerned that Iran is right now and my personal phone has burned up in the last 8 or 10 days, where people telling me that there are real issues at our southern border. One friend told me that last month they pulled in intercepts of more than 600 people who are on the terror watch list. That's the ones they intercepted. So the question is then, how many did they not intercept? How many got through between border checkpoints? We know that almost half last month of all of those that came across the southern border were from the Eastern Hemisphere, not from Guatemala or anywhere else. And I know as of last night that there are new public reports that Iran is putting warships in and out of Venezuelan ports. Are they bringing people? Are they bringing, material? I don't know, but we know that Venezuela is, a communist haven, and we know that there is this, for lack of a better sort of phrase, repeat the phrase, axis of evil that has included Iran, North Korea, Russia, China, and Venezuela, Cuba. I mean, these are all parties that have no respect for the individual, no respect for individual rights. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are the other end of what they think. And they don't think anything about that. And so they hate us. They hate us because we promote the values that ultimately, God willing, will free their own peoples and that keep us free. And so this is a battle. This is a titanic battle of ideas and munitions. I do not believe, and I'm pretty confident in this, that I do not believe Iran wants a full all-out war with us. I think they would lose that immediately. I mean, we have 2 carrier battle groups in there right now. It would be messy. There would be a lot of carnage, but at the end of the day, Iran's leadership would be gone. They would be out of there. I don't wish that on anyone. I wish Israel to be able to protect themselves, and I wish that this not escalate, but rather shrink back and we get some degree of stabilization. Ultimately, events like this, and there was one in 1967 and 73, and there was the Intifada, and there were a bunch of other situations that Iran has largely kept the cap on. But I think we're at a point right now, and people can go back and even hard to hear me say it, but read Jimmy Carter's book, The Blood of Abraham. Go back and look at the history of this region's conflict and the sectarian back and forth going back 3,000 years. And then say to yourself, look, maybe in our time, should we not try to create some degree of peace if we can? The reason, to your core question, Rebecca, the reason this happened is because where Ronald Reagan and even Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton and George Bush and Donald Trump tried to prioritize peace in this region, and Trump was making real progress, the Biden administration considered this just one more piece of the world and didn't give it much attention at all. And they ran away from Afghanistan and they invited Russia into Ukraine, a small incursion. They got in bed with China. And at the end of the day, Iran said, you know what, this is our moment. We can take a shot at Israel, and we're going to take a hard shot at Israel. Well, Israel's now pushing back. But I'd like to believe at the end of this, we could take a time out and just say, hey, how about the possibility of trying to create a real regional peace? And maybe there's a way that the Jewish state and the Palestinians can finally begin to work together, not against each other, and not being put through the paces of a proxy war with Iran, where, as you said, Rebecca, just a moment ago, thousands of children have died. It's a horrifying thing to see adults, but it's an even more horrifying thing to see children be the victims of this, which they invariably are.
Yeah, I do see the war certainly expanding. So many people are calling for a two-state solution, while others are saying that's impossible. Where does it end, Bobby?
If you go all the way back in time, and people don't tend to do this, but let's just go back 100 years. When this Balfour Declaration came into being, which said the Jewish people had been pushed into the diaspora, they had been pushed out into the world, they needed a state of their own, and they said they will create a state after World War I. They will create a state of their own for the Jewish people. It was almost an internal contradiction, because if you read the Balfour Declaration, it says they will create a state for the Jewish people, but at no prejudice to those who presently live there. Well, believe it or not, back in that day, people like Theodore Roosevelt, before there was all this deep terror and exchange of missiles and all that, people like Theodore Roosevelt said, well, maybe there's room for a democratic kind of a governance here. Well, that has now gone out the window, because the attacks on Israel, starting when the state really came into being in 1948, have been relentless. And there have been just thousands and thousands of Israeli citizens killed, and there have been thousands of Palestinians killed. What I really think needs to happen, it's like anything else in life. If you make a priority of it, you can fix it. If you put your attention on it and you really believe that it's worth all your effort to get it right, you can begin to bring peace around. I truly believe that. There's nothing inevitable about war in that region. But what has to happen is that those on all sides, including the 21 Arab countries of that region, including people like Erdogan in Turkey and al-Sisi in Egypt and in Jordan, they have to believe that this is worth the effort, that in fact, they don't want their grandchildren and great-grandchildren doing exactly the same thing that's happening right now. So I'll be honest with you, we have come to moments 20 years ago, and even during the Jimmy Carter years and the Reagan years, we have come to moments where we were almost there, where whether it was the Oslo Accords or some other piece, Trump's Abrahamic Accords, where we were almost there. And I think what we're witnessing right now is that the world explodes into chaos when you have a weak America and a weak American president. And we have both of those right now. The American people
Well,
are fed. Yeah.
they are, and that leads me to, Israel is our greatest ally. In your opinion, do we have the right leadership surrounding the president, President Biden, to prevent this whole thing from spiraling? I mean, it's bad enough that we're in a proxy war currently. We know things are going to get worse before they get better. How confident are you in our leadership?
I worked for years beside Colin Powell, and I will say he was a level head under all circumstances. And, going all the way back in time when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dick Cheney wanted to use tactical nuclear weapons in Iraq, and Powell said, under no circumstances will we do that. I think if we have good leadership, if we have level heads, and there are some that can prevail on this president, even though this president seems only half there, and his leadership, I mean, the leadership in the cabinet, Austin and Blinken, to me is awful. I don't see them as acting in ways that are proactive. I don't see them. I mean, if they had been proactive, they wouldn't have run away from Afghanistan. They wouldn't have put us in a position where we're fighting now defensively. They wouldn't have cozied up to Iran. They wouldn't have seemingly invited Putin into his world. I think at the end of the day, though, there is a reason to believe we can get this right. And I think that I think what it takes at the end, Rebecca, is Powell-like leadership, Reagan-like leadership that is level-headed, adult, sensible, and says, look, guys, we can keep killing ourselves and each other here forever, but you're never going to kill your way to peace. And so at some point, we need to, and this is what Trump did, and it's actually what some of the other presidents have done in the past. We want to prioritize this. We want you to prioritize it. We realize it's going to take some healing and some forgiving, and it's going to take a tremendous amount of rebuilding, and it's going to take trust. But, there were moments where Rabin and Perez and, frankly, Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat almost got there. The problem is you have to believe first in the vision of peace before you can get there. It's like everything else. If you want to be an Olympic gold medalist, you have to envision it here first, and then you have to go make it happen. And I think we have to get in a position where we, America, believe in ourselves again. We believe in our own leadership. Our leadership believes in itself, and we believe we do have a role. Indeed, we have the premier role as a moral leader, as a physical leader in the world, to try to get these places stabilized and get it back to order. There's nothing inevitable about where we are, Rebecca. There's nothing irretrievable about it until it gets really out of control. And I think we can keep it under wraps if we just focus on making that a priority.
Yeah, of great concern to me is this rise in anti-Semitism. We see this happening right here at home. We see what's happening at college campuses, and it seems to me that the message that these young people, many young people, are chanting is one that is really wrapped in a lot of ignorance. They don't understand that Israel should have that, and we need to support their right to defend themselves, and also the terrible culture around these terrorist groups that are really all about destroying Jews across the globe. I mean, that would be their ultimate goal. What kind of message would you want to put out there to the younger people who believe that it's compassionate. And I said to you earlier, it breaks my heart to see
Yeah.
these children, especially, children that always get you dying there in Gaza. So many innocent lives that are caught in the middle. Nobody is for that. And
Yeah.
that keeps me up at night. It really does. But what kind of message would you want to give to the younger folks, or perhaps our AMAC members who are speaking to their children, their grandchildren, that they ought to understand that it's not just that black and white?
Yeah, I think what I would say is that writ small, you can't kill your way to peace, which means you can't protest your way to peace. At the end, you have to take the belief, you have to really embrace the idea that hate is wrong. So I don't care where the hate shows up on one side or it shows up on the other. At the end of the day, it's wrong. We can talk merits, we can talk the Holocaust, we can talk about what the Jewish state is and what it should be, and how the Palestinians should have their own place to be. We can talk about all that. We have to start from a premise, and the premise is that peace, just like peace in a family, peace in the world is hard. Okay. And when there are pre-existing feuds and blood feuds that go back centuries, it's even harder. You have to take it in a sense on yourself that I want to be a constructive force, not a destructive force. I want to embrace the idea that peace is possible. So how do you get to peace? It's not a one-sided process. Again, you cannot kill your way to peace nowhere in the world, because it creates vendettas and blood vendettas, and they go on forever. What you have to do is you have to get two parties, in effect, to sit down together and to find some common ground, and with that common ground to begin building what can be. And there's a lot of temper that gets involved in that. There's a lot of heartbreak that gets involved in that. All you have to do is think about something happening to your own family member and how heartbroken and angry you would be about that. But at a certain point, blessed are the peacemakers. Those are the ones who have the patience and the courage to get people to talk to each other. Winston Churchill once said, "It takes courage to stand up and speak, and it takes courage to sit down and listen." And part of the problem we've got today is that everybody's out there doing the transmit and the broadcast, and nobody's doing the receive and the sit down and make useful outcomes come out of all of this chaos. Look, I think it's a terrible moment right now. It's hard to talk about peace when you're in the middle of a war. World War II cost the lives of 1.5 million children. That's a horrible price to have paid for getting rid of an evil. And I'm not encouraging anything that, I think we, the United States, believe very firmly in the Geneva Conventions, and we try very hard to spare civilian lives. That's why we have special operations teams that go through a building and carefully go room to room. But we're in an environment right now where there's an awful lot of pain, there's an awful lot of anguish on both sides. And I think part of what you have to instruct kids to do is think constructively. Think about being part of the solution. Don't just admire the problem. Don't just protest because you can go out there and make a lot of noise. Don't go transmit things across the web because you can just shout and scream from your own private rooftop. Instead, think constructively. Go back and read some of these books. Think about, how do you get from where we are to where you believe we should be, and then start being part of the solution. Start trying to talk to those that you think you disagree with. And of course, hate has no room in any of this. Anti-Semitism, anti-anything as a matter of just hate that has no place in the United States of America. We were founded on the principle. Go back and read the founders. They talked about protecting Jews. They called them the Hebrews. They talked about protecting Muslims. They called them Mohammedans. We believe in America that every single human life is sacred, is precious, is given by God. And as a result, we don't believe in the idea of random killing. We actually believe in the idea of preserving every life if we can do it. So I think we just have to get back to the idea that peace is possible, that hate has no room, no place in America, has no place in the world. And yet the world has a lot of it. So we're going to have to try to wring that towel out and get back to the idea of believing in the possible. If you can believe in the possible, you can make it happen. Or as Einstein said, only those that believe in the invisible can do the impossible. We have to understand that there are principles that are bigger than just hate, and we've got to embrace those principles and make them us.
Well said, Bobby. It really enforces how complex this whole issue is. And of course, we all support Israel, and yet we also hurt for the innocents in both Israel and Gaza who are currently suffering. So we're going to continue to pray. Prayers matter, prayers work, and certainly we pray that once Hamas is done, that we will see signs of real peace. And then maybe people can start to really think about how important peace is.
Yes.
Bobby, I want to shift to another issue today, and this one is really tied to something closer to home, right here in Washington, D.C. Now, you've worked for two House speakers. You know how hard it is to keep a caucus, all the members of one party together and get things done. The House has a new speaker, Mike Johnson from Louisiana. And from what I'm reading and from what I'm hearing, he seems like he's really off to a good start. So as you look at this process and how Johnson got to the speakership, seeing all of these great big issues ahead, and then of course the slim margins that Republicans have, how do you see his speakership and his chances of really uniting the GOP? How do you see him succeeding?
Yeah. So what a great note of hope to land on. I think that this guy Johnson, who I do not know, is doing a grand job. I think the fact that they're trying to attack him personally for his faith only shows you they've got nothing else to work with. That his positions, which are sort of the Reagan positions, the AMAC positions, a stronger defense, a smaller government, lower taxes, a solvent government, security at home, lower crime, a commitment to national security abroad without overextension, the idea that we are responsible, individually responsible, all that stuff that he's talking about, faith, the First Amendment, the fact that he would pray within the chamber for something better than what we've got. I think people trust him, Rebecca. I think that's the number one thing. And if think about it, it's the number one thing in life. I mean, if we might not agree with everything a leader brings to the table, but if we think they're honest, they have integrity, they're trustworthy, we feel a little better. I mean, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill didn't agree on everything, but at least they trusted that each other understood, understood each other, and they could trust what was being said. So I think this Johnson, I think he's benefiting from something that Ronald Reagan again always liked. Ronald Reagan liked to be underestimated, and that's a funny thing to say, but he always had that self-deprecating good sense of humor and the ability to sort of say, yeah, bring it, go ahead, I'm ready. You don't think I'm ready, but I'm ready. And I think this guy Johnson is showing that even with the lowest margin of majority, 4 votes, that, I mean, he pulled 220 votes, his own caucus. So the whole caucus. So I think, in a sense, it's what he needed, but it's also a reflection of the fact that this guy obviously has real leadership credentials. Credentials is the wrong word. He has real leadership instincts, and people recognize a leader. Winston Churchill, as a young man, was often sort of flayed on the personal front. They didn't like the fact that he smoked cigars and drank a lot of scotch, but the fact was he had instincts that were a leader's instincts. Ronald Reagan had a leader's instincts. And I think this guy Johnson, from what I can tell, has a leader's instincts. He's not ruffled easily. He's not interested in himself. He is selfless. Another thing that Colin Powell always wanted in his people, thing that Jim Mattis wanted in his people, wanted selfless people around him who understood the idea of mission and duty and the idea of higher purpose. And I think we're lucky to have this guy. Who knows? Maybe you have to sift a lot of sand before you get the couple of pebbles that you really needed. And I think that's kind of what we've come through and where we're at. And I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I watched a recent interview. Mike Johnson, when asked, where do you get your worldview? He said, go to the Bible. I get my worldview from the Bible. And of course, a lot on the left attacked him for that. But I do think that keeps him grounded. And it really underscores the fact that our great nation was really founded with Christian Judeo values that are so important, that keep us together, that unite, and that speak to our great freedoms here. So thank you so much for that perspective. Bobby, before I let you go, I love it when we wrap up with a good piece of maybe humor, positivity, hope. Somehow you always seem to be able to strike that. So if you could, perhaps, you've worked for so many important, famous people, really, former bosses of yours. Could you give us a short story, maybe an anecdote tied to some of the men that you've worked for over the years?
Yeah. So I think, I've been blessed to work for good people. If you work around good people, with good people, that's a blessing. It really is. And frankly, we as Americans have also been blessed to have good leaders. We really have, by and large. And I say that having worked for Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush in their White Houses, and having worked day in and day out with Colin Powell, I think people don't appreciate. We live in an age of cynicism, Rebecca, where we tend to think that, well, everybody's just one more version of the last bad story. But those guys were not. They really were unique, and they were uniquely self-deprecating, humorous, humble. And so, a couple quick stories, I guess. Let me just think. Well, with Reagan, there's 1,000 stories, but maybe I'll just tell a little joke that he used to tell. He used to always quibble in a good humored, good naturedly way with his friend Tip O'Neill, who was also Irish, but was on the far, well, what we used to call the far left, seems like more like the middle left now, but on the left-hand side of the political spectrum. And so one of the stories he would tell is about a congressman who was involved in a heated debate. And this was kind of a lesson by Reagan that you have to be careful what Congress tells you. You can't always trust that you're going to get what they tell you you're going to get. You might get something else. But Congressman went to the floor of the chamber to speak about a very controversial issue, and he did. And he came back up to his office, and Reagan would say, he would tell this story that he came back to his office and sat down and was glad he'd been able to say what he needed to say on the House floor. And a constituent, before he could blink, was in his office and came in and said, I really love what you said down there. You really stood for the right things, and I'm just grateful you went down and supported that bill. And the congressman said to his constituent, well, I appreciate your saying that, and you're right. You're absolutely right. And the constituent went away happy. And it wasn't more than a minute or two, and another constituent was in his doorframe, and he invited him in, have a seat, and he said, look, you were just dead wrong about everything you said on the floor there. That was just wrong. This is what you should have said, and this is... So he kind of took it on the chin from this constituent, and when that was over, he said to the constituent, I really appreciate your coming in. You're right. You're absolutely right. Now, that constituent left happy. Well, this member of Congress's wife happened to be sitting out in the foyer, out in the anteroom, and she had heard all this happen. And she came in and she said, honey, you can't do that. The first constituent came in here and said you were right and you agreed with him. And the second one said you were wrong and you agreed with him. You can't run your affairs that way. And, well, the congressman looked at her and he said, honey, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. And so... the point is, Reagan would say, trust is kind of an important thing, and you have to keep your word. If you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. That goes to a story about George Herbert Walker Bush, who I worked in his White House. A very different kind of a leader, a humble man who was not quite as gregarious. He liked governing better than he liked campaigning, but he had a high integrity about him. He was the youngest naval aviator. He was shot down after dropping his payload from a burning plane. He was shot down in the Pacific, and there's actually someone here in town, no longer alive, but who was on the San Jacinto with him, and said a little known fact that actually an unpublished fact that he was rescued by that carrier, or put on that carrier, and had been flying an Avenger, and he had I think a broken jaw and a broken rib, and he had lost his navigator. Now, in this day and age, you would have been shipped off to Germany and back home to Walter Reed, and that would have been the end. He said George Herbert Walker Bush, at the age of, I think, 18, was back up flying another Avenger, completely loaded with armaments within 30 days, despite his injuries. So that's the kind of man he was. And when I worked in his White House, there would be speeches that would cross my desk. I was part of what they called OPD, the Office of Policy Development. And we were always given an opportunity to contribute in that little office to the speech. And I would write in, we were in the middle of a campaign year at that point, 91, 92. I would write in, if he was going to speak at a military academy, that, basically talk about his service, and in that context of having served himself. Every single time I would look to see if that line stayed in. And after dozens of times putting some reference to his own military career in, it was always taken out. So I finally went down one night to Steve Provost, who was the chief writer at the time. And I said, Steve, what gives? It was like 10 o'clock at night. I don't understand. He's in the middle of a campaign against Bill Clinton. He has all of these attributes. Clinton didn't serve. I mean, why does it keep coming out? And Steve Provost pushed his chair back and said, Bobby, welcome to the club. He said, when I first got here, I would write things about what a great leader he really was and what he had done in the service and his own heroism into some of these speeches. And he said, I would take it over to the Oval and the president would get out a red pen and he would put a line through everything I wrote. He said, after that happens 3 or 4 times, you don't put it in anymore. That's the kind of person he was. Steve said he thinks that either the American people know he is a bona fide war hero or it is not his right to tell them. And that is the kind of leader we need.
Yeah.
So,
and it's such a good, important reminder to keep, we all have to remain humble. And it's also to be reminded of a great veteran as we look forward to Veterans Day and honor those who have served, who have risked their lives for all of us. This is so important. It is a season of hope, right? Even despite the world that we live in today. Bobby Charles, thank you so much for joining me today. God bless you. And to everyone out there listening, don't forget to renew or join AMAC if you haven't, and tell your friends and neighbors about us. Matter of fact, you may want to buy them an AMAC membership for the holidays. What a great way to show your friends and loved ones that you care about this great country. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. Have a blessed day. God bless you all.
The Association of Mature American Citizens is the conservative voice for Americans 50 and older. AMAC is fighting for the values that you hold dear. Join today. Together, we can write the course of America.